I don't think anyone needs to hear me explain why the Velma series is bad. You know it, I know it, we all know it. It's really not some well-hidden secret. It's actually quite beautiful seeing so many different people from all different backgrounds come together to agree on one simple thing. This series is absolute garbage. But I want to talk less about the quality of the show and more so what led to the show's creation and the marketing behind all of it. Velma is a series that pretty much exists in a vacuum. It is a series that is literally for nobody. It does not appeal to anyone, it struggles to stick with one age demographic, and it actively makes sure to avoid anyone who may have been interested in it. Scooby-Doo is a popular franchise that has been around for 53 years, meaning that the series has reached audiences throughout multiple generations. This means that the kids who were fans of Scooby-Doo in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s have grown up and matured, and the media people consume is a reflection of that. And while I don't think there is any shame in watching the same things you watched as a kid, because we all do it, the idea of your childhood shows now appealing to your life and your experiences as an adult can be pretty intriguing. This is especially the case for a franchise like Scooby-Doo that is centered around solving mysteries and dealing with the supernatural. So this show would have the advantage of a built-in audience who would watch this show simply because of the fact that it is Scooby-Doo with a little spice. However, the people behind the series did not take that advantage and instead would just try to piss off anyone who loved these characters. They kept things like the names and appearances of characters, as well as some basic character traits being kept the same, but made characters completely different otherwise, and Scooby-Doo is nowhere to be found. But honestly, changing character traits or their dynamics with each other is the least of their crimes. At the end of the day, it is an adaptation, which allows for some flexibility. However, the thing about changing things up this much is that while those established fans will tune in for the first episode, you will have to win them over with these new versions. But each of these characters are absolutely unlikable with very little redeeming qualities, except for Norville, who did nothing wrong and deserves better. So yeah, that Scooby-Doo audience is thrown out the window. But I mean, hey, adult animation is no dying market, right? Things like The Simpsons, South Park, Bob's Burgers, BoJack Horseman are all popular animated series that are aimed for adults with humor and themes that would apply to an older audience. And while Velma was marketed as such, the humor would not line up with the things that were going on in the series, with childlike jokes going on at the same time as the adult elements.
She has no brain! Oh, I'm not dissing her. She has no brain!
And of course you can't bring up the adult animation audience without bringing up the 420 joke, which I'm still confused about what the joke actually was, but...
You know what 420 is, right?
Yeah. It's code for adults who still watch cartoons.
So yeah, adult animation fans likely weren't going to continue watching either. So HBO Max would have to go a different route in order to get this series out there and be successful. And as we all know, just making a good story is completely off the table. To even expect that from an HBO Max original, not to be confused with HBO originals, would be expecting the impossible. Nothing good comes from a show exclusively on HBO Max, besides the occasional gem like Peacemaker that somehow broke its way out of those doors. So what could they do? What could their approach be to get people to not only watch the first episode, but the entire first season? And the answer is pretty simple, yet layered at the same time. In order to achieve what they did, it would take someone who was knowledgeable in modern day film and TV discourse. Someone who paid attention to all the discussions surrounding popular media, especially franchise media, like Velma, where there was an audience who had expectations for what they were going to see. If there was a person who was observant enough, they could take what they know and artificially create discussion surrounding the show. Therefore, the show would be marketed for free. But what exactly are those key things that swayed the success of this series? How did a series that barely anyone enjoys become the most watched animated original on HBO Max, besides the studio removing and canceling all of their animated series? And who were the people that Velma specifically targeted in order to spark the discussion? Today, let's talk about the unfortunate events in fandom that led to a series like Velma being created. Now, if you are someone who has watched my previous videos, you're probably wondering why I would possibly want to talk about a series like Velma on this channel. And for one, I do want to say that I have plans to make more non-Star Wars video essays, but today's topic actually relates to Star Wars more than you think. Not because Star Wars is releasing content as bad as Velma, God forbid, but more so because Star Wars garnered the exact reaction that the creators of Velma sought after. Allow me to take you back to December of 2017 when a film called The Last Jedi was released. The Last Jedi is the 8th film in the Star Wars franchise, and it is without a doubt the most divisive Star Wars film. Discussion surrounding this movie is still going on today, and it quite honestly changed the way that the internet engages with media altogether. One thing I've always said about that movie is that, at least among less casual Star Wars fans, everyone has a strong opinion on the movie. For lots of people, it is genuinely an abomination to them, and they cannot see how anyone possibly likes this movie. For others, it is a movie that is like a love letter to the franchise and one of the most well put together films in Star Wars. And before either side tries to say in the comments that nobody hated it or nobody loved it, which I got a lot of in my last video discussing the fandom, saying that just shows that you only engage with people who share your opinion, which is totally valid and normal, especially for a franchise like Star Wars with so many sub-fandoms. But to say that there hasn't been an ongoing argument about The Last Jedi, with people defending and critiquing it, is just wrong, and most who engage in Last Jedi discussion will admit that. Most people who do engage with this movie are completely fair and valid, with their love or hate coming from a story or filmmaking standpoint. A lot of critiques are things like disagreeing with the direction Luke Skywalker was taken, which is a critique that is bound to happen for a character that has had fans for 45 years. Other critiques are things like the pacing, with sequences like Canto Bight feeling unnecessary to some, or a big part of the plot surrounding a ship following another ship without being close enough to actually attack it. And for all those critiques, there is someone who thinks the exact opposite, who also has a valid opinion on the movie. And while a lot of people still fail to see how the opposite side of the fence could think the way they do, most level-headed people can agree that it is just a movie, and that at the end of the day, it does not matter if you love or hate it. But for some, that just wasn't enough. It had to be taken 10 steps further. For a very loud group of people on both sides of the fence, the conversation surrounding The Last Jedi became a political argument that was reflective of the state of modern-day politics. After the release of the movie, a group called the Fandom Menace was formed. The Fandom Menace, by their own definition, is a group that is against anything that they consider to be woke, or SJW, or anything that aligns with left-wing ideologies. This was a group that absolutely hated the movie, but for reasons that weren't just because they thought the story was bad. For example, the character of Rey is a huge topic of discussion when surrounding this movie. Rey is a character that grew up on a desert planet alone from the age of 6. She was a scavenger who had to find parts that she'd sell to Unkar Plutt for quarter portions of food. Most days, she would be lucky to receive 1/4 portion, and that was after a long day of having to defend herself against the rogues and criminals of Jakku. She did this every day for 13 years before she found herself tangled up with a runaway stormtrooper named Finn. This made Rey a target of the First Order as well, and would also be when she discovered that she had the Force. But not only did Rey have a connection to the Force, but she was also extremely gifted without much training. The antagonist of her story, Kylo Ren, is a Force user who trained for 15 years before Rey ever did. He was the son of Leia Organa as well, which made him a descendant of the Chosen One, Anakin Skywalker. He was also extremely gifted in the Force, but in their first duel against each other, and Rey's first duel altogether, she defeated him. Now, personally, I think that the story justifies this choice for many reasons, and I could spend the time going into it, but that is not the point of this video. Because quite frankly, even though I disagree, it is completely valid to think that Rey is overpowered. The issue is when people, like the Fandom Menace, suggest that she is overpowered because of her gender. Rey is the main character of the third Star Wars trilogy, meaning there were 2 trilogies that came before hers. And in both of these trilogies, the main protagonists are 2 male characters, Luke and Anakin Skywalker. So the new trilogy was always going to have a female main character, whether George Lucas made it or Disney made it. That was always the plan, plain and simple. I think this is a completely valid choice, but for people like the Fandom Menace, they saw this as virtue signaling. Virtue signaling, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, is the act or practice of conspicuously displaying one's awareness and attentiveness to political issues and matters of social and racial justice, especially instead of taking effective action. So the way the Fandom Menace thinks that applies here is that the creators of the sequel trilogy weren't looking to create a female character because they truly believe that there should be, but instead to win over women and feminists. Now, I'm just going to call this claim what it is: bullshit. It is completely valid to think Rey is overpowered, but what makes no sense to me is to suggest that it is because the writers wanted to uplift a female character. Because at the end of the day, Rey's story rhymes with the stories of Luke and Anakin, the other main protagonists of the other trilogies. Things that make her overpowered are present in both of those male characters. I mean, seriously, all 3 of them are the Jedi prodigy of their trilogy, destined to change the galaxy with the mere amount of power they wield. All three were found on a desert planet where conditions were absolutely horrible, especially for Anakin and Rey, who were forced into slavery and scavenging just to survive. But suddenly, someone comes in and takes them from that desert planet where they learn of the power they have. And by the end of their first films in these trilogies, with little training, they are able to use the Force to defeat their enemy. For Luke, he blew up the Death Star, making a 1 in a million shot without even using his targeting computer. And he did so by tapping into the Force when Obi-Wan literally tells him to do so. For Anakin, he uses the Force twice, both times without even realizing. The first is to win the pod race, a race that no other human has ever won or survived playing in. But for Anakin, he was able to do so at just 9 years old, just like he was able to also fly a ship for the first time and destroy a gigantic Trade Federation ship. And finally, for Rey, she was able to tap into the Force to defeat Kylo Ren in her first duel after literally getting her ass handed to her. She was only able to defeat him when Kylo mentioned the Force, and she tapped into it similar to how Luke did to blow up the Death Star. But let me stop there, because honestly I could talk about the hypocrisy in their criticisms of Rey for an entire video. Quite honestly, the criticisms of Rey are the very least of their crimes. Virtue signaling can be a valid critique, especially when those takes come from the minority groups being targeted. Truth is, many companies do try to appeal to people in that way. I mean, just look at companies like Target during Pride Month. Do you think that they actually care about queer people, or they're just trying to make money off of that merch? The issue though is that with the Fandom Menace, or at least the top creators in that group, they have proven time and time again that they just have an agenda.
Now you made the Force female, huh? Oh, diversity, agenda everywhere. You know, it doesn't matter if the movies are good or not as long as we have diversity. That's the modus operandum right there. That's everything. That's the all-important factor here, because white boys were going to buy Star Wars tickets no matter what.
They do not care about minority groups being exploited. If their criticism started and ended with Rey being a part of Lucasfilm's virtue signaling, that might have some merit. Instead, the Fandom Menace extends this same sentiment to any woman or minority character, no matter how baseless it is. For example, in that same movie, The Last Jedi, we meet the character Vice Admiral Holdo. Holdo is a cis woman whose gender is never once mentioned in that movie. Holdo was a character that was meant to get under the audience's skin because your expectations were meant to be subverted when you realized she was actually in the right all along. So a valid critique of Holdo would be that she was annoying, or that you didn't like her character. An invalid critique is calling her an SJW and calling her Vice Admiral Gender Studies when, as I said, there is nothing in her character that mentions any of this. Same thing with Rose Tico, a character that is unlike anyone we have seen in Star Wars. It is perfectly valid to suggest that Rose didn't fit into this movie, or you also found her annoying or her place in the story. But to suggest that it was done so because they were too focused on her being an Asian woman, despite real world race literally not even being a thing in Star Wars, it is clear what the agenda is there.
Starting with Kylo Ren, who is pretty much the embodiment of an emo millennial. He's angry, troubled, always complaining, has no dad, and is a bit of a mama's boy. Top that off with the fact that him and Hux are the only white male main characters, and they're also evil assholes. And well, put all that together, and you could see the SJWs in the writer's room had a pretty clear agenda.
Bitch, you better be joking.
You see, I've heard a lot of claims about this movie, but Kylo Ren being representative of SJWs is probably the funniest one I've heard. They were simply bringing their own biases and bigotry into their takes, rather than just discussing what they did and did not like. And from there, the Fandom Menace started to become a cesspool of bigotry, misinformation, and rage culture. And this group made things worse for everybody, especially those who dislike the movie for reasons other than an Asian woman existing. Because so many of their misogynistic and racist takes were rooted in actual valid critiques that many level-headed people shared, other people started to think that disliking Rey was inherently misogynistic. So people with just regular, everyday critiques were starting to be labeled as toxic, bigoted, misogynistic, you name it, simply because a group wanted to take those critiques and tarnish them with their agenda. And then on the other side of the fence, if you liked the movie, it was because you were a woke liberal SJW. At least that is what you were labeled as. But where did these takes even come from? Why do so many people parrot them, and what exactly gives members of the Fandom Menace any resemblance of authority? Earlier in this video, I said that The Last Jedi completely changed the way that people engage with movies nowadays. The biggest reason for that is, thanks to the Fandom Menace, you can create a full-time job out of having bigoted and misinformed takes about movies. When the sequels came out, Star Wars content creation was on the rise, especially on YouTube. The content people watch on this platform is usually catered to their interests outside of it. So, for example, if you are heavily into makeup, chances are you are watching some of the many makeup videos on here. It's the same thing for Star Wars or Marvel or any media really. Blabbermouths like myself will offer our takes on the franchise, whether it is theories, opinions, or deep dives into niche topics in Star Wars, and people watch it as an extension of their own personal fandom. It is nice to hear what other people have to say, even if you don't necessarily agree with them, because you get a look into what others in the fandom think, and may even have your own opinion persuaded if you are presented with a new and different perspective. But when the fandom was divided, this also meant that creators would be divided. So that means if a creator's views aligned with the Fandom Menace, that is what their content would be about. But as I stated before, it all started from a place of valid criticism. Something that is completely normal in a lot of people is that they will feel one way towards something, but can't exactly pinpoint why they feel that way. This happens a lot with any type of media, where by the end of it, you just can't put into words why you didn't like it. So occasionally you'll go to YouTube and find someone of the same opinion who could better articulate why they feel that way, and suddenly it clicks in your brain. And so if someone didn't like The Last Jedi, but couldn't pinpoint why other than the fact that they did not like what they saw, hearing critiques about virtue signaling might sound completely valid to these people. And maybe it's just me trying to see the better in humanity, but I truly think that a lot of people had good intentions at the start. Because as I said before, companies and studios virtue signaling is a thing. If someone genuinely felt like Lucasfilm was taking advantage of minority groups, that comes from a place of good intention. However, it becomes very clear as time goes on who has good intentions and who does not.
Why are we talking about Kathleen Kennedy? Well, number one, it gets really good views on the channel. And of course, I am on YouTube to get views. Contrary to popular belief, you're on YouTube because you want views. I've had a YouTube channel for 5 years, and for four and a half of those years, literally nobody watched our videos. I love The Last Jedi, and I think it did a damn good job for being what it needed to be for Star Wars. See you with another video, and today we are going to talk more about Disney and their feminist agenda, and why they can't keep shoving this garbage into Star Wars.
For example, when Kelly Marie Tran, the actress for Rose Tico's Wikipedia, was changed to include racial slurs in her About section, good luck trying to convince anyone that there weren't any racist intentions behind the Fandom Menace. When Daisy Ridley and Kelly Marie Tran are bullied in their comments to the point of deleting their social media, it becomes pretty clear that the Fandom Menace uses virtue signaling as a scapegoat, and it is merely just a buzzword these days. One of the most recent events was during the Obi-Wan Kenobi series when the character of Reva was introduced. Again, another character that is not void of criticism. However, when the actress Moses Ingram is receiving DMs using racial slurs and death threats, again, it's crystal f***ing clear what the intention was. And despite Moses posting multiple screenshots herself, and people's comments about her also being on public forums, the Fandom Menace denies that any of these things even happened. And the thing about Reva is that, even more so than Rey, the things that they said were so easily debunked. As I said before, the things they called Rey were applied to every female and minority character. One of their favorite phrases is Mary Sue, which refers to a character archetype used in fiction that describes a young woman character who displays power or gifts without any real reason. Mary Sues are typically characters without character flaws. For people who believe that Rey is overpowered with no explanation or reasoning, she would fall under the Mary Sue category. But what was once an actual literary term used in story critiques has been redefined by the Fandom Menace to basically mean any female character that they did not like. So characters like Reva were called Mary Sue by the Fandom Menace despite there literally being nothing to back that claim up. Reva is a character that, like most Jedi of her time, trained at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. And after Order 66, where she was able to survive by playing dead, she becomes an Inquisitor trained under Darth Vader. Anakin Skywalker, the literal chosen one, trained Reva in the ways of the dark side of the Force. To say that she has no reason to be powerful or does not face any hardships or setbacks is objectively incorrect. Have all the criticisms you want of Reva or Moses Ingram's acting performance, but to say she is a Mary Sue is a clear sign that you are just hating on female characters, especially because she embodies exactly what people say they want from Rey, a powerful female character that has a valid reason to be powerful. I think training under the Chosen One is valid enough, to be honest. Another Mary Sue situation that the Fandom Menace would never tell you about revolves around the character of Cara Dune. You remember her, the character played by actress Gina Carano, who was fired after repeatedly being warned about her political tweets regarding the COVID pandemic and transgender people? By no surprise, Gina Carano and her character Cara Dune are praised by the Fandom Menace. They love her because she says the same exact things they say, with all the conspiracy theories, Holocaust comparisons, defense of even worse conservative icons, and transphobic jokes that any Fandom Menacer could ever dream of. But you may remember that there was about a year before she even started tweeting things like this. A peaceful time before anyone knew anything about her political stances between the release of The Mandalorian Season 1 and Season 2. And what did the Fandom Menace think of her after Season 1? What did those reactionary YouTubers have to say about Cara Dune? Yup, that's right. She was a Mary Sue once too. And despite literally nothing about her character changing in The Mandalorian, now they swear that without her, the show is going to fall to pieces. She suddenly carried The Mandalorian. Hell, why even call it The Mandalorian? Clearly, there are way more important characters in the series, like Cara Dune, played by the Meryl Streep of Star Wars. But before, they were saying she was a horrible actress with zero expression and were not impressed with the way she came to a draw with Din Djarin when fighting him because she's a woman and he's a man. They again called a character a Mary Sue simply because she was a strong female character, despite the fact that her explained backstory of being a rebel shock trooper from the planet of Alderaan, a planet that no longer exists, completely disproves this take within seconds. And then bam, Gina Carano aligns herself with the anti-liberal, anti-left-wing views of the Fandom Menace, and suddenly she's a strong female character. And then they claim that Disney is misogynistic for removing a strong female character. I have always said that if Daisy Ridley were to hop on social media right now and spout tons of transphobic takes, the Fandom Menace would do one of two things. One is they would suddenly become the biggest trans right activists this planet has ever seen, with all the legislation against trans people being wrapped up tomorrow. Or they would claim the character of Rey as one of their own, saying that she is the best character in all of Star Wars despite the actress's views having nothing to do with the character. If Disney announced that she is never coming back because of said remarks, there would be boycotts and hashtags created by the Fandom Menace begging Lucasfilm to bring Rey back. Because what these top Fandom Menace influencers say does not matter to the audience who watches them. Removing logic and sharing misinformation is like the Jedi Code for the Fandom Menace, because the people watching them aren't going to know any better. They will just listen to what these people have to say without even thinking a little bit for themselves. Did you know that in the Star Wars fandom, some of the most popular videos on this platform are about the firing of Kathleen Kennedy, the female president of Lucasfilm? The Fandom Menace blames Kathleen Kennedy for pretty much everything that they think has gone wrong at Lucasfilm since Disney bought the franchise. The left-wing agenda that the Fandom Menace claims plagues Lucasfilm is a direct result of the female president Kathleen Kennedy, or so they claim. For things like the sequels, they like to act as though Kathleen Kennedy was behind every single decision for those films and made sure to make a product that would purposely ruin the childhoods of Star Wars fans. But for things that the Fandom Menace does love, like The Mandalorian, they claim that Kathleen Kennedy had nothing to do with it. They make up blatantly fictional stories about how Jon Favreau kicked Kathleen Kennedy off set and that Dave Filoni is just waiting to swoop in and steal her job. The reality of the situation is that she played the exact same role on The Mandalorian that she did with the sequels. Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, the creators of The Mandalorian, have sung Kathleen Kennedy's praises before their projects even begun at Lucasfilm. At every Star Wars celebration, in interviews, behind-the-scenes documentaries, Jon Favreau says he is extremely grateful for what Kathleen Kennedy has done in regards to The Mandalorian and their entire slate of spin-off series that, might I remind you, she greenlit. Oh, and about all those claims that she'd been fired or removed from the company, you know, the thing that is the most popular thing to talk about in the Star Wars fandom, 10 years in and we have still yet to see her removed or fired. Does that stop the Fandom Menace from claiming that she is on the way out every day? Absolutely not. And what is funny is that one day, Kathleen Kennedy will ultimately decide to step down as Lucasfilm's president. And when that happens, the Fandom Menace will claim that they told you so. It doesn't matter if it takes 20 years, they will be ready to claim that they knew all of this all along. And their misinformation regarding Star Wars spreads out to other fandoms as well, especially the Marvel Cinematic Universe. With Marvel, it all started with the film Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel is the first female-led superhero movie within the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with 20 male-led movies that came before it in this franchise. The breaking point was one singular film that not only focused on a female superhero, but catered to women in a way that Marvel never did before. And people can say that the other movies never had a gender demographic when creating those movies, but they'd just be wrong. Women and femmies definitely enjoyed Marvel before, but they were not a main focus when it came to who these movies targeted. I promise you that Black Widow fighting in heels and a skin-tight leather suit was not meant to get women excited for a strong role model. even if some women do think it is badass. Captain Marvel would be the first movie in the MCU that actually introduced a female character who was just as badass and important as the men, all while not presenting her within the male gaze. The film starred Brie Larson, who was in a competition with Kathleen Kennedy for Public Enemy #1 of the Fandom Menace. In 2018, Brie Larson gave a speech at the Crystal Plus Lucy Awards where she brought attention to a USC Annenberg study which finds that of the 100 highest grossing films in 2017, 87.5% of critics reviewing these films were white people. The study also breaks it down by gender as well, with 27.5% of all critics being women. Less than 10% of critics were men of color, and less than 2.5% were women of color. Now, why is this an issue? On a surface level, these numbers really don't seem to matter because who cares who is reviewing these films, right? People say, why do you have to bring race into everything? Not everything is about race, but that is not the case for storytelling. It does matter because of target audiences. Brie Larson provides the specific example of A Wrinkle in Time, which is a movie that has the target audience of teens and more specifically women of color. Every movie has a target demographic, whether it is something broad like a family movie that the whole family can enjoy, or it can get more specific with things like Transformers being meant to target younger boys and things like the animated Barbie films being targeted towards younger girls. A Wrinkle in Time is about a biracial family with the main character being the daughter of said family. So with this movie having a specific target audience, the reviews that would make the most sense to hear from would be predominantly women, teenagers, and black and biracial people. That is not to say that you don't want to hear from white men or white women or white teenagers at all. It just means that their voices shouldn't be the focus of all the reviews.
So why does that matter? Why am I up here giving you statistics? What I am saying is that if you make a movie that is a love letter to women of color, there is an insanely low chance a woman of color will have the chance to see your movie and review your movie.
If you are someone that does not understand this concept, I want you to picture a film that centers around sports. It is a film that highlights all the great things about sports and the positive impact that it has on men specifically. It focuses on the idea that sports have brought men together to create a positive environment where they could share something they love. The target audience for this hypothetical movie is clearly men and boys alike who absolutely love sports and share that same positive experience. Now imagine that before this movie comes out, you want to look at reviews for what people think of the movie. So you go to Rotten Tomatoes just to find that 87.5% of the reviews are written by people who don't like sports at all. 25% of all reviews would be from men who do not play sports, while 62.5% of the reviews were written by women who don't play sports. 10% of the reviewers would be from women who play sports, and only 2.5% would be from men who play sports. Out of all the reviewers, only 2.5% would fall under every category for the target audience of this film. Would you trust the reviews on Rotten Tomatoes knowing that only 12.5% of people reviewing it professionally were able to connect the movie to their real lives in any way? Probably not. I mean, just like A Wrinkle in Time, that would not mean we don't want to hear from people who don't play sports. However, why would their voices be at the center if they wouldn't connect to the story in the same way? And sure, you can make the argument that films should just be for everyone, but if you say that, are you really applying it to every film? Are you upset that the first Star Wars film was targeted at 12-year-old boys? Do you apply the same criticism to the target audience of the Karate Kid films? It seems like this topic of target audiences only comes up when a film is looking to specifically target minority groups. So think of how easily I just explained that to you. Most can understand what Brie was trying to say. So what if I told you that this started a gigantic hate campaign against Brie Larson that still goes on to this day? Brie Larson is the #1 topic to get your Fandom Menace Grifter channel to blow up, and it all stemmed from this speech, because they claim that she hates white men. When in the speech, she literally addresses whether she is saying that she means she hates white men or is trying to remove white men from their jobs. And the answer, as she says, is no.
Am I saying that I hate white dudes? No, I'm not. But what I am saying is that if you make a movie that is a love letter to women of color, there is an insanely low chance a woman of color will have the chance to see your movie and review your movie.
We can just expand to get more diversity in order to ensure that the actual target audiences of films are the ones reviewing them. Brie is not calling out people, she's calling people in. This is just another example of the twisted narrative that these big Fandom Menace YouTubers create. And now for Marvel as well, it just extends to every female character that comes on screen, with criticism that has never applied to the male superheroes. Things like how Tony Stark, the character that started the MCU, he's extremely arrogant and it is usually seen as a likable trait in his character. But if Jennifer Walters, aka She-Hulk, acts at all arrogant, it is an irredeemable character trait. The Fandom Menace even loves to call the MCU the MCU now because they believe Marvel is focusing too much on women characters. In reality, this last phase of Marvel had 11 projects with a male lead and 8 projects with a woman lead. Of the 19 projects named, 4 of those films would have both a male and female lead character. And 3 projects not included in that 19 would be ensemble projects with men and women making up the group. While the MCU is definitely so much more inclusive than before, the data still sways slightly in favor of the male audience, so it's not like male-led Marvel movies went anywhere. In fact, with Marvel pumping out what feels like 20 projects a month, it's not like men are receiving less content than before. It feels like instead of taking away male-led projects, they just added in more female-led projects. I don't see the issue with that, and most level-headed people don't see the issue either. Marvel is still the most successful franchise, pulling in tons of money for every project they make, despite the Fandom Menace telling you that they're absolutely going bankrupt. And what the Fandom Menace doesn't realize is that they are actually contributing to that success, but we will discuss that later in the video. My favorite part about Fandom Menace YouTube is the crossover episodes. Let me read you some titles from popular Fandom Menace YouTuber Mike Zero. I'd be willing to bet that Mike Zero is responsible for 99% of Fandom Menace misinformation when it comes to Star Wars. The first one reads, Jon Favreau finally fired Brie Larson from TV series. True story is here. Interesting. Brie Larson wants to cancel George Lucas. Oh, really? I didn't even know they'd met. Disney CEO just canceled Brie Larson. Oh no, I was really looking forward to the Marvels. What is going to happen to that film now? And here is a bunch of iterations of Brie Larson is having a meltdown towards Star Wars fans. Now, if you are wondering why this is so funny, which bless your soul if so, I could only wish to live in a world where I didn't have to know this shit either. Brie Larson has nothing to do with Star Wars. I mean, literally nothing. She is not even rumored to be in any upcoming project. In fact, I couldn't even find any made up articles that she'd be in anything that hasn't already been released. She has expressed interest in Star Wars, saying that she'd love to be a part of it, but that is as far as it goes besides a few pictures at Galaxy's Edge. I mean, think of how little shame you have to have in order to release content that is so blatantly incorrect. I feel like I have explained the hypocrisy of the Fandom Menace enough, but in the case that you still aren't convinced, let's do a lightning round. Recently, popular Fandom Menace YouTuber made a round of videos all about how Avatar 2 was bombing at the box office, claiming that since the film is being distributed by Disney, it must be for woke people. But in reality, what they considered woke people were criticizing the film for white savior tropes and cultural appropriation. When RK Outpost learned of this, suddenly he contradicted himself, saying that the film was a huge success and a big middle finger to woke Hollywood. Back in 2018, the idea of Kathleen Kennedy being fired became extremely popular again among Fandom Menace YouTubers. And not even a week later, it was announced that her contract was extended for 3 more years, all the way until 2021. Oh, and you may notice it's 2023, and she is still the president of Lucasfilm. Unless they want to tell me she actually isn't the president and the real president is Dave Filoni or some shit, which quite frankly would not be a new claim for people whose views align with the Fandom Menace. And then just some general Fandom Menace L's is when Robert Storms, popular Fandom Menacer, had a meltdown over Parasite winning both Best Picture and Best Foreign Picture at the 2020 Oscars. His point was that only American films should be nominated for Best Picture, but then goes on to claim that the UK film 1917 would have been a better option. Though clearly it was never about American films, it was the fact that Parasite was an Asian film. Or this popular Fandom Menace YouTuber who claimed that Wakanda Forever is a racist movie because they made T'Challa an absent father. Again, for those who don't know, T'Challa f***ing died in that movie. He is literally no longer around because he died. That same person also claimed on Twitter that they look younger than Brie Larson due to Brie's Hollywood diet and skincare routine.
I mean, let me ask the audience.
You see, as funny as it is to laugh about all of this, because we know for a fact that most of the people who make this type of content simply do it for views and don't believe what they're actually saying, it's important to note that it does not really matter what their intention is. While almost all of them are just doing this to make some pretty decent money, the impact it has is very real. Some people in the world are just dumb. That's how it is. People are even going to watch this video and run to the comments proudly defending the Fandom Menace despite the plethora of evidence surrounding misogyny, racism, and just general bigotry. Some people just simply believe what they hear. As a Star Wars content creator for the last 6 years, I've spoken to some of these people directly and asked why they still believe in it despite all the clear misinformation and manufactured outrage. Some have said that it simply gives them hope that there is a deeper explanation out there for why they feel the way they do, even if they know it is fake. So basically like an escape from reality. Though the issue with that is so many cannot even separate reality from the fictional universe they created in their head where Brie Larson and Kathleen Kennedy are the antagonists. Others believe in the lies wholeheartedly with the mindset that the evidence against these things is somehow faked or fabricated. And they'll reference the times that the Fandom Menace had valid critiques or shared the pieces of the truth that would align with their narrative. It is a continuous cycle that is hard to break. It's one thing when people are saying these things to make money. It is another when those people are influencing people who genuinely believe this stuff and center their lives and opinions around it for free. So you may be wondering why the hell you just sat through a 35-minute explanation on the Fandom Menace when you actually clicked on a video about Velma. And I am happy to tell you that we have made it to that portion of the video, so thank you for sticking around. Remember at the beginning when I mentioned that Velma was looking to activate a very specific group to cause a very specific reaction online? That group is none other than the Fandom Menace. OMG, I know, a huge plot twist, right? The creators of Velma saw what was happening in film and TV discourse, specifically in franchise media like Star Wars and Marvel, and wanted that for their series. Because the truth is, as much as the Fandom Menace wants to act like they are boycotting Lucasfilm, causing the company to lose out on money, that just isn't the case. If it were, we wouldn't be on the verge of the upteenth Mandoverse show starring that goddamn child. Not only are they not contributing to the loss of Lucasfilm, but they're benefiting it way more than they could ever know. Do you really think someone is going to click on a video of someone claiming that there is an ongoing war at Lucasfilm where creatives are fighting to the death to get their identity politics in there and not want to check that shit out for themselves? If I clicked on a video claiming that the Scooby-Doo franchise was going through the same exact thing, you bet I'm going to put on the Scooby-Doo franchise to see what is going on. And the creators of Velma knew that. They made it happen. That is exactly why I watched it. The first time I had ever heard of the Velma series was when the first looks of the series came out, and the typical people were overreacting because the character of Shaggy was race swapped to be a black man in this series named Norville. One of the Fandom Menace's favorite things to talk about is the race swapping we see in modern day media. The biggest race swap controversy recently revolved around The Little Mermaid when people learned that Ariel would be black in the new live action film. People freaked out over this decision, and you'll never guess which YouTube commenters were leading the discussions. When this stuff happens, you get the typical people who post this image of Ryan Gosling as T'Challa saying that if that were to happen, the left would freak out because of the race swap. For starters, characters of color get race swapped all the time, and you don't hear the Fandom Menace complaining about that. But the difference between a character like T'Challa and Ariel is that Ariel's culture is not part of the character whatsoever. If Ariel is white, black, Hispanic, Asian, you name it, her story will always play out the same exact way. For T'Challa, if you remove his blackness, you remove a large part of the story. He is the king of a tribe in Africa. His story revolves around being from Africa. His experiences line up with that of the black experience. Without that, it would be a different character. But for Ariel, all that changes is the color of her skin and the size of the curl in her hair. For Shaggy, this is the case as well. There is nothing about his story that changes depending on the color of his skin. In fact, this is the case for every character in Velma, in which nearly every single one is race swapped. And that is when I started to realize that this may be on purpose. Because not only did the character's race change, but so did the basics of their entire personalities. And what is the Fandom Menace best at? Taking a valid critique and adding a layer of bigotry to it. Most people will recognize that the horrible changes these characters have gone through have nothing to do with the race changing. It's more so the fact that Velma, Daphne, and Fred are all extremely unlikable, rude, you name it. I mean, who would like a version of Velma that laughs hysterically at Norville confessing his love to her in an attempt to make her feel better? The creators knew that the Fandom Menace would see the race swapping of characters and go on to make videos about how the characters were completely changed because the writers were too busy race swapping the characters. So they even throw them a bone by actually changing up the characters. And though the changes had nothing to do with their race, they knew the Fandom Menace would jump right on it. And if the Fandom Menace was freaking out about it, they knew the opposing side would tune in to see what they were overreacting about this time. Because the way our culture works, if one side doesn't like something, the other side will claim it just to piss off the others. We are seeing this play out in real time with Hogwarts Legacy. What would be considered the left is asking for a boycott of the game due to the problematic nature of the franchise's creator, while the right is convincing themselves that the $70 game that they just bought, simply to piss off the left, is totally worth it and is definitely the best game ever. And another thing that a lot of creators fail to understand is that if someone likes your content and you are talking about a show, they're going to want to watch the show to understand your content. So the Fandom Menace brings in 3 audiences by itself. It brings in the people who engage with media in a political way on the left, it brings in people who engage with media in a political way on the right, and it brings in people who just want to know what the hell is going on. So let's recap the plan that the Velma series set out. Step 1 is to find a franchise that is popular enough to have a built-in fan base, but also have characters that are known to people by very specific standards. Step 2 is to change things up to get those fans pissed. Change the entire personality of characters and bring in almost nothing that resembles the original characters besides looks. Step 3 is to take this valid critique, but add race swapping to the mix. That way the Fandom Menace will become involved and create reactionary content about how woke the series is. And to that, add as many other things that the Fandom Menace will get pissed over. Make the characters queer, attempt to add in commentary on mental health with things such as panic attacks, all things that the Fandom Menace will call SJW nonsense, and in turn go out and bully those minority groups because they believe they ruin their favorite franchise. Step 4 is to literally do nothing else. You don't have to tell an intriguing story or have character work through good writing, because now, no matter what the hell is in that show, people are going to watch. But what if I told you that the Fandom Menace wasn't the only group they were getting to dislike the series? Here's the funny truth about the Velma series, and I mentioned this before. Nobody f***ing likes this show. Not the Fandom Menace, not left-wing film bros, not the people who actually touch grass and have no idea this show has anything to do with a political stance. The point of this video is that I truly believe that this was on purpose to get people to hate watch it. Because this show pissed off the people that the Fandom Menace would consider woke as well. For starters, it is pretty clear as day that this was all intentional to make a quick buck, which means things like representation were actually used as a marketing scheme, but not in the way that the Fandom Menace thinks. Instead, they just throw their minority characters under the bus in order to get racist reactionaries to comment on how much they suck. This means that they are just allowing racism to happen in the name of marketing their horrendous series, because nobody was talented enough to just make a good series and market a good series that people will actually enjoy. The show also has a ton of harmful jokes that are pretty problematic in itself. I mean, you have commentary on the Me Too movement.
Because the brilliant Velma Dinkley knows everything about everyone and isn't afraid to say it.
Exactly. I spit truth without a filter, like every comedian before #MeToo.
This sort of joke may seem like it is meant to make fun of people who speak this way, especially since Velma is meant to be unlikable, but it's not really a joke when you hear it coming from Mindy Kaling's voice. If you didn't know, Velma is voiced by Mindy Kaling, and she is also the executive producer on the series. And while the Fandom Menace will swear up and down that Mindy Kaling is some woke icon, I promise you there is no woke person who likes her either. Mindy is extremely problematic. The confusion comes from the fact that during the Office days where she got her start, she was one woman in a team of 8 writers. She did fantastic work on that show, and many do love it. And for her to be a woman of color in the writer's room was a huge deal, something that the Fandom Menace would consider woke. But Mindy, like a lot of comedians of her time, have gone on to either dive right into the right-wing hemisphere or ride the line so much that they have rope burns. One of her first claims was that The Office couldn't be made today because people have become too sensitive. And quite frankly, I never found anything that offensive about The Office, and it is still literally one of the most popular shows of all time. Did she think that was possible without bringing in people from the new generations? Mindy would also find herself in a ton of controversy surrounding the way she represents her characters of color. For Mindy, she is a writer that takes a lot of inspiration from her own life. Truly, I don't think self-inserting is inherently a bad thing for writers, as so many writers do it, and very rarely do you hear that criticism from men. The issue people find with Mindy doing it is that she is only into white men, and therefore her Southeast Asian characters are a reflection of that with their relationships. Quite honestly, I have not watched her other series myself, and I am also not Southeast Asian, so I cannot tell you whether this critique is valid or not, though I can imagine that if you are a fan of the diversity in Mindy's work, that it would be a bit strange to see her characters obsess over white men. And there were a few other instances where she liked tweets by J.K. Rowling, someone who is also problematic and transphobic, but the biggest instance with Mindy Kaling is an interview she did on The Conan Show. Now before I continue, I want to give everyone a warning as this next part will discuss sexual assault on set of Mindy's shows. Please skip to the time listed if you are sensitive to that sort of discussion. In an interview with Conan O'Brien, Mindy would talk about her experience with the actor Lee Pace on her series The Mindy Project. She explains that they filmed a scene together in bed that was just supposed to be them having a conversation. In the scene, Mindy would kiss Lee Pace without him knowing, as it wasn't in the script. She would joke about how it was improvised simply because, in the moment, she was attracted to Lee Pace. After Lee's reaction, she explains that producers came up to her asking why she would do such a thing, knowing that she could be sued for it. And her response to these people was, "Tell anyone and you're fired."
But we had this one actor on the show named Lee Pace, who's very. Do you think you brought a picture? There he is. That's a good look. That's a very good-looking guy. Yeah. He came on the show, and we had to do this flashback sequence where we were in bed together in college, and we're just supposed to be having a conversation. But like, he's so tall and he's so handsome that in the middle of it, he was just supposed to be like, "What do you think, Mindy?" And I was like. And I looked around, and I improvised just kissing him in the scene, which was not in the script.
It's not that, see, you just went for it. You just started kissing that guy, that picture, yeah.
He was just looming, he was looming above me.
Yeah.
And he asked me a question, I was not listening to him at all, because who cares what he was saying? And I was just like, And then he reacted like that, and I pretended it didn't happen. And then I walked backstage. We have two writer-producers, Ike Barinholtz and David Zassin, and they were like, "Hey, man, what are you doing? You could be sued for that." And I got very scared, and then I said, "Tell anyone and you're fired."
In this interview, she would joke about this entire experience as if she didn't just admit to not only kissing someone without their consent, but using her power dynamic to get away with it. She mentions that Lee never complained, and there's always the possibility that this is fabricated to be edgy or funny, but honestly, I don't think it matters either way. Mindy has also bragged about the fact that because she produces her own series, as well as writes and acts in them, she can cast any actor to write in scenes to do whatever she wants with those people, such as extensive kissing scenes where she admits to not faking it when she gets into it. All of this to say that Mindy is no woke icon, and while her career may have started that way, it certainly won't end that way. So I promise you that no liberal or left-wing person is enjoying this pathetic series or her Me Too jokes that don't sound like jokes coming from her. Velma is essentially a parody of what the Fandom Menace finds to be woke culture. It is just meant to target a specific reaction from both sides of the fence to get people talking about it. Now, it doesn't take a murder mystery detective to come to the conclusion that Velma is a product of what film and TV discourse has come to today. Anytime you discuss a piece of media, in one way or another, politics will be brought into it. That is just how many things are nowadays. But the tragedy of modern day storytelling isn't the fact that we are getting more diversity on and off screen. It isn't because more voices are being heard, from women to people of color to queer people to disabled people and so much more. These people exist in the world, and it is amazing that the media we consume is finally acknowledging people that aren't just what society considers to be the standard. The real tragedy is that we have allowed reactionaries to completely change the way media is discussed, to the point that studios are noticing. It's funny that the Fandom Menace has always claimed that studios like Lucasfilm are looking to do what was done with Velma, and that the people behind these stories don't care. Because while it has been proven time and time again that there are people behind the scenes at Lucasfilm and Marvel Studios who do care, they still claim that to be false. And in doing so, they have let creatives like the ones behind Velma know that it is profitable to cater your series to what the Fandom Menace claims to hate. We are now stuck in a reality where Velma is already renewed for a second season, and if we keep it up, this shit will get 7 more seasons plus 4 spin-offs and an Avengers level movie to conclude the whole thing. Is that what you want, or can we go back to good storytelling created by people of all different backgrounds who actually want to tell a good story that they are passionate about? Because at the end of the day, these stories are an escape, not just a quick way for studios to earn a buck off of what is essentially artificial viewership. So let's take a vow to never talk about Velma again. Just kidding, I'll see you for the video essay I make for season 2.